He had a high position, whoa, and a very loud volume knob. Okay. He had a high position in King Darius's court. You know who King Darius was? No. He was the king of Babylon. You've probably heard of Daniel. So very well that King Darius decided that he was going to put him over the whole entire kingdom. Everything was going to go through him, kind of like Joseph did back in Egypt. But you know what happened when somebody else got promoted? Everybody else who was his equal at the time became jealous. Have you ever seen that where you work at? Yeah. Happened to me when I was managing the bus service in Yorkville, Illinois. Had to hire a safety trainer, and I chose a lady who had less experience than another lady who applied for the job, but much better with people. And when I did that, then we had all sorts of problems that if you ever have an hour and a half, I'll tell you what happened in Yorkville after we hired that one person and everybody else got jealous. But that's what happened to Daniel. So they got jealous and they went to King Darius and they said, let's do something really cool. This is Steve Kirby translation. Okay. You are so great and mighty, King Darius. Let's have a 30-day period where all we do is pray to you. And if anybody prays to any other god, anybody else, any other being, then they get thrown to the lions. And King Darius thought that that sounded pretty cool. So that's what they did. Daniel said, no way. 3 times a day, he would go to his room, open the windows, and pray to God. So they went and waited for him to open the windows. And he did. Now, King Darius, Daniel was his favorite. So he kind of ignored it throughout the day, even though they came to him. And finally, at the end of the day, they said, hey, if this is you, King Darius, and you made this decree, how can you not follow through with it? And he said, basically, Daniel, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. So he put him in the den of lions. And he rushed there the next morning, and Daniel was still alive, and Daniel says, my God, shut the mouths of the lions. I think it takes courage to stand up for what you believe in when nobody else is doing that kind of thing. There were 3 other guys who were doing kind of the same thing Daniel was during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar. You can write that down and we'll have a spelling bee contest later. Okay. During the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know how I used to remember that when I was little? I'd say Shadrach, Meshach, and to bed we go. Okay? But they were doing a great job too in what they were doing. Until King Nebuchadnezzar became so full of himself that he said, we're going to build an image of me. And if anybody worships anything else other than my image, then they're going to be put into a fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, no way. We belong to the one true living God. King Nebuchadnezzar was not as nice as King Darius was. So he brought them in and he talked to them and they said, I'm sorry, no way. And the Bible says that his attitude towards them changed. Listen to how it says this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, the furnace so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the sons of the gods. What did a kind of courage Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to say, I'm sorry, I don't care what everybody else is doing. I don't care if it costs me my life. I have courage. I have faith. We belong to the King. And God saved them. How about in the book of Acts? Paul and Peter are at some Gentile believers' houses. Gentiles were basically anybody who was not of Jewish birth. You know those problems maybe. Between Jews and Gentiles, they just didn't get along particularly. They didn't associate well together. Jews just were not used to this idea that God really loved everybody and wanted everybody to have salvation. So Peter and Paul were there and they were eating with the Gentiles. And that was fine until some Jewish people came down from Jerusalem and walked in, and Peter did one of those kind of things where he backed away from the group that he was with and didn't have anything to do with them for a while. You've seen people like that? And Paul stood up in the middle of everybody and said, hey, Pete, how come before they were here you would eat with us? And why not now? And see, I think that took courage on Paul's part to stand up and confront who many people considered at the time to be the head apostle. Okay? It took courage in that relationship thing. How about these people and their courage? You can read about them in the book of, my Bible just fell apart. Hope we don't need that verse later. In the book of Hebrews chapter 11. Good thing I have it memorized, huh? Yeah. What more shall I say? I don't have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flurry of the flames, escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foes. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned. They were sawed in two. They were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. Courage to stand up for what they believe in. The dictionary describes courage as that quality of mind or spirit that enables us to meet danger or opposition with fearlessness. Don't you love stories of courage? Huh? Don't those things just like make goosebumps go down your back, just give a shiver down your back when you read about or you watch someone who saved somebody from burning buildings? You know, we have a fireman who comes to church here. I haven't asked him this question, but maybe he has saved people from burning buildings, and I'd love to sit and listen to his story. Or you hear people talking about dodging bullets to rescue a comrade. I have a friend in Plano, Illinois, who actually had bullets in the bottom of his shoes and in a camera that he had on his backpack as he crawled into Vietnam trying to pull his buddy out of the fight. He doesn't like to talk about it much, but he does have those things still. Or how about the people who dive in front of a moving car and pull a baby to safety? Or, hey, I love the Rambo movies, you know, and the Rocky 1, 2, 3, 4 through 49. You know, how many times have you watched? Don't you love it when, like, they play them all right in a row on Channel 60 or something, you know? I mean, I love those things. I think I told you about my feelings about the movie that's out now, Deep Impact. I don't know if anybody saw that yet or not, but I just loved it when the astronauts decided that they would give their lives to blow up the asteroid that was coming towards the Earth, and they knew there's no way that they could get out, and they were going to die. Or when the lady reporter gave up her seat on the helicopter so a lady and her little girl could get on there. It gave me chills. You ask my wife. I cried at that movie. I'm probably the only one. I love those stories of courage. You know why? Because that's what I want to be like. That's exactly what I want to be like. So often, I wish that I just had more courage. I don't want to be scared by circumstances. I don't want to be paralyzed by fear. I don't want to cave in and compromise my convictions when I find myself in difficult challenges. I want to stand strong. I want to be courageous. Sometimes I regret the fact that acts that we hear about, we read about, or we see are those ones that are extreme acts of heroism. I love those stories, but they're almost bigger than life because it's not what most of us are in all the time, is it? But I have seen as I'm getting older and approaching number 41 here very soon, okay, that it takes a lot of courage just to live every day of our lives, to meet those everyday challenges, to choose between right and wrong, to stick to my convictions or to cave in, to take a carefully thought out risk or to remain where I'm at, safe and secure, to believe in God always or to doubt Him and second guess Him. It takes courage. Let me share with you some areas that I think take an enormous amount of courage in our everyday life. I think, first of all, it takes courage to become a Christian. To become a Christian in the first place, to make that choice the very first time. You know why? Because it means that I have the courage to be vulnerable. You really get down to it, what does it mean to become a Christian? You and I, individually, have to stand before a holy God and say, I blew it. I'm a sinner. Here's exactly what I have done that's wrong. And that's being vulnerable. We don't live in a world like that, do we? You remember when you were in college or you were in high school and they gave you at the beginning of the semester all the assignments that were going to be done and exactly what was going to be done at the end of the year? And those people who did not get them done, obviously that was none of us gathered here. We were always done on time. But those people who did not get done, did they go up to the professor and say, man, did I blow it? I just slept away. I played basketball. We played cards. We ate pizza late at night. And I'm sorry, so whatever penalty you want to give me, go ahead. No, we say, the dog ate it. The printer wouldn't work. The computer crashed, you know? We don't take those things. The responsibility. We don't like to be vulnerable. There are people who say Christianity is for weaklings. And one guy said it's for men who eat quiche. Okay? I think it takes an extreme amount of courage to be open up to a holy God and say, yes, this is me, this is who I am, and I blew it, and I need you. It takes an extreme amount of courage. I think it takes courage then after that to be a Christian. Not just to become one, but to be one. You ever play that game where you got a group of people and they get up paired up in twos and you put a blindfold on one of them and the other person gives them directions on where to walk? You ever play that game? I don't know what you call it. We used to play it at camp and at vacation Bible schools and things like that. And you always had the kids who would walk somebody into a wall and stuff like that, you know. But for the most part, the kids who were giving directions were pretty good about it. But the people with the blindfolds on, you could see tremendous differences in them. There were some people who would just step right out. And even if the person would say, run 12 steps, they would just take off just like that, running. The other people, like, feel with their foot a little bit, you know, every step that they take. Although I think what was common to all of them, they really wanted to rip off the blindfolds. You see, sometimes being a Christian is like that. Sometimes I think we feel like we're blindfolded because we don't know all the answers. We don't know all that God has in store for us and everything that He knows. We don't understand His answers. We can't clearly see where He is leading us to. And sometimes we just want to rip off that blindfold and say, this is not for me. I just want to step back. The courage is just to step out there and follow Him and listen to His words when I don't understand, when I don't see clearly. Because sometimes His commands seem illogical to us, don't they? They seem countercultural to what the Word is. Some of the tests that He allows to come into our lives stretch us, we think, past our limits. Some of the adventures that He brings in our life makes us afraid and scared, and we doubt Him. Spiritual courage to be a Christian, I guess it's kind of on my endangered list of character qualities. To have the courage to be a Christian. Another kind of courage that I think is in danger of extinction is relational courage. You know what it takes to build a meaningful relationship with your spouse? I think you could put it in one word. This morning you would probably know what that word is. I think it takes courage. It takes intimacy in a marriage for it to flourish. And it takes courage to be intimate. It takes courage to look your spouse in the eye and say, I think we're in trouble here. It takes courage to pick up the boxing gloves and say, I'm going to fight for this. The truth is, what we normally do is put it on the back burner, and if we ever get time for it, maybe we'll deal with it then. Truth is, we don't usually have time for it then, do we? So we put the problems on the back burner, pursue our own careers, go our own directions. It takes courage to avoid the greener grass temptation in a marriage. And it's not just in marriages. With our kids and with our friends, it takes courage to build relationships that last. To look our friends in the eye and say, isn't it time we stop talking about the weather and the Cubs? How are things at home? How are things with the Lord? Doesn't that take courage to take that step a little bit deeper? Doesn't it take courage with our kids and building relationships with our kids to deal out appropriate discipline and then deal with their not liking that discipline? Isn't it easier to keep the discipline out of the picture and just enjoy one another's company? It takes courage to discipline our children and deal with that. It takes courage to be moral in the society that we live in. Let me ask you some questions. What kind of guts does it take to be honest? What kind of courage does it take to operate ethically in the marketplace? What kind of courage does it take on April 15th to write down all the income that you have? April 15th is probably a great day of separation, isn't it? Huh? Not just me from my money either. Does it take courage to stay sexually pure in the sex-crazed culture that we live in? You know, my stepson Dan and I, we kind of joking about this all week. You see those new strips that are out that take blackheads off? You seen those? They kind of look like Band-Aids. They put them on their forehead, on their nose, on their cheeks and stuff. We saw an advertisement for one this week, and it was girls in bikinis on the beach who had these on their face. Now, have you ever been to a beach and seen anybody with those on their face? What kind of suntan do you get when you take those off? Do we live in a sex-crazed culture or what? Huh? There's another, and then Dan just plays it up all week. There's a Tylenol commercial on yesterday of a lady who appeared to be around 90 years old in a swimming suit, swimming in the ocean, and she says, it's the Tylenol that helps me swim. And Dan says, now, what does a woman in a swimming suit have to do with Tylenol? So those things go back and forth in our house. But we live in a sex-crazed culture. What kind of courage does it take to stay sexually pure where we live? Huh? How do I grow in courage? How can I get stronger in my courage to stand for what is right, to not back out on God or my family or my friends to go deeper and show courage in those situations I find myself in. 3 things. At least 3 things that I think. I think, first of all, you have to face your fears. When I was a small kid, I was a catcher. I think Ryan was a catcher in Little League Baseball and Pony League Baseball. My dad was my coach, and I hated dropping to my knees and blocking the pitches that were in the dirt. I knew that I was going to get hurt when I did that. I don't care what the mask I had and the helmet and the protectors and all that stuff. I knew I was going to get hurt if I just jumped in front of that ball. You know what my dad did? My loving dad? He took me out in the backyard with no protection and threw pitch after pitch in the dirt in front of me and made me block it without the protection. Okay? I love him to death. Yeah. But he made me face that fear. You know? I mean, he wasn't throwing blazing hard fastballs. Dad, if you're listening to this, okay, they get all these tapes, you know how moms are. Okay. But he helped me to face that fear. I think courageous people are just like you and me. At some point in their lives, they learned to face their fears and deal with them. What is that area that you need more courage in? Is it time to stop running from it and face it? First of all, we need to face those fears. Second of all, I think we need to surround ourselves with good models. The book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 says that bad company ruins good character. Bad company ruins good character. If I spend the majority of my time with spineless people, I will probably become spineless. So will you. But if I make a conscious decision, a calculated choice to increase my exposure to courageous people, people who I look around and see them showing courage, I will probably grow in courage. Who are those people around you that you see who stand strong, who are courageous? Be with them. Read biographies, you know. Read about Moses. Read about Elijah. Read about Esther in the Old Testament and Ruth. Read about David and Paul. Read about Mother Teresa, Billy Graham. Surround yourself with models of courageous people. People who, though sometimes maybe they were petrified of the situations that they were in, they went ahead in faith and grew in courage. Lastly, Paul writes in the book of Romans, not to be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our minds. We need to have our minds changed. That's where we get back to the beginning of our day. Fear not, for I am with you. Though we might feel like we're blindfolded. Are you guys talking to each other up here? Okay. Even though we might feel like we're blindfolded and we're walking dark in the forest, we aren't. God is always there with His people. He promises to be with us. He says, I didn't give you the power to be timid, but to be strong, to be bold, to be courageous. Spend time in His Word. Spend time with Him. Let Him change your mind. Some people say that's not possible. I know it's possible. I've seen it in people's lives. I've seen people transformed, and it's because it started up here, because God was working in their lives. Face those fears. Surround yourself with models of courage. And let God work in your life and transform your mind. Courage is foundational to being a Christian. It's foundational. Where do you need to grow in courage in your life? Spotlight something. Face it. And let's grow in courage, huh? Let's pray together. My gracious, kind Heavenly Father, I ask your forgiveness for the times where I don't stand strong. And I ask your forgiveness for anybody here this morning who has done the same. Father, I pray that you'd work in our lives, that through your Spirit, that you might transform our minds, and we might be renewed, that we might become courageous people, that we would face those areas that scare us, those areas that we back away from, those areas that we put on the back burners. Father, help us to be courageous. If there's one here this morning, Father, who is maybe afraid to become a Christian, Father, I pray that you'd give them the courage to take that step. I pray, Father, that we might have the courage to walk with you step by step, to walk in your ways. No matter what comes, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if you save us, if you do wonderful things in our life, fine. If you decide not to do wonderful things, that's fine too. We just want to walk with you. We love you, Lord. It's in your Son, Jesus' name I pray.